question. Senator Di Natale.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is for the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Bob Carr. Minister, last week you met with your counterpart from Indonesia.
Order. Senator Brown.
As you know, it's impossible to hear Senator Di Natale up this end of the chamber, and I'm sure that the minister cannot hear the question, so won't be able to answer.
Senator Brown, that is a valid point of order. I had called order. I had called in particular 2 members of the Senate to order so that Senator Di Natale can be heard. Senator Di Natale.
Thank you, Mr President. I might begin again. My question's for the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Bob Carr. Minister, last week you met with your counterpart from Indonesia, Marty Natalegawa, and the defence ministers of both nations. Can you inform the Senate as to whether the issue of West Papua was raised as part of those discussions? And if not, when do you plan to raise the issue of West Papua with the Indonesian government?
Wait a minute. The Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Bob Carr. The Minister.
Mr President, it was raised. First of all, Mr President, it was raised by me when I assured the Indonesian Foreign Minister that Australia, and both sides of Australian politics, fully recognised Indonesian sovereignty over the Papuan provinces. I told him that that was recognised, I reminded him that that was recognised in the Lombok Treaty, signed by the Howard government with Indonesia in 2006. I underlined that I understood that case. All the governments of the world recognise Indonesian sovereignty, and it would be a reckless Australian indeed who wanted to associate himself with a small separatist group which threatens the territorial integrity of Indonesia and would produce a reaction among Indonesians towards this country. It would be reckless indeed. But, Mr Speaker, I can say this. The Indonesian Foreign Minister nominated to me the responsiveness of the Indonesian government to oft-expressed Australian concerns about human rights in Papua. Before I could raise the subject, as I was fully intending to, the Indonesian Foreign Minister nominated that they have a clear responsibility to see that their sovereignty is upheld in respect of human rights standards. I was impressed by that, and it reflects the fact that the previous Australian governments, I know this Labor government, I assume a coalition government, have raised these concerns with Indonesians, and reflects the fact that Indonesians have listened. Indonesians have listened. And I again would warn any member of the Senate against foolishly talking up references to separatism in respect of the Papuan provinces. That is reckless, and it's not in Australia's interest.
Order. Senator Di Natale.
Thank you, Mr President. My supplementary question does relate to the Lombok Treaty, and I do need to remind the new Foreign Minister, I understand he's new in his role, but the Joint Standing Committee on Treaties report of the 6th of December made a bipartisan recommendation, and I quote, "The Australian government should encourage the Indonesian government to allow greater access for the media and human rights monitors in West Papua." Now, if this is still the government's position, what has Senator Carr done to further this aim?
The order. The Minister.
Mr President, I can assure the Senate that the Australian Embassy in Jakarta will continue to raise matters of human rights in respect of the Papuan provinces, and will do so in respect to the recent sentencing of 5 men in Papua province to 3 years imprisonment for subversion. Australia's got a strong and consistent record of upholding the right of persons peacefully to express their political views freely, and Australian officials in Jakarta will raise our concerns over these sentences. But we will do so as a friend of Indonesia, absolutely explicit and unabashed about asserting Indonesian sovereignty over the Papuan provinces. The Lombok Treaty, again, I refer to the fact it was signed in November 2006, coming into force in 2008, is based on such a recognition. Support for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, national unity and political independence of each other. Similar language is used in the preamble.
Senator Di Natale.
Thank you, Mr President. I have a further question. It also relates to the J. Scott report, which I remind the Foreign Minister is about what the Australian government, not the Indonesian government, has agreed to do. And I quote recommendation 2, which says that the Australian government should increase transparency in defence cooperation agreements to provide assurance that Australian resources do not directly or indirectly support human rights abuses in Indonesia. Again, I ask the Foreign Minister, what steps will you take in your role as Foreign Minister to ensure this recommendation is ensured and that transparency of Australia's role?
For asking the question, the Minister.
Mr President, in those full and frank exchanges last Thursday with our Indonesian counterparts, the Defence Minister and I canvassed Papua, and the Indonesian Foreign Minister referred again to the progress being made by Indonesia in shifting responsibility for law and order in the Papuan provinces from the military to the police. President Yudhoyono, a great friend of Australia's by the way, has committed his government to raising the living standards of the people of Papua and reinvigorating special autonomy. Australia believes that this is the best path, the best means of achieving a safe and prosperous future for the Papuan people. And we'll support, through our aid programs, we're the biggest aid donor to Indonesia, and a recognition of that is reflected in the Lowy poll, which I recommend members of the Senate read. Australia's held in high standing by the people of Indonesia. We'll continue to work on these great tasks.